We have a lot of presenters and a lot of information and a lot of interesting information, and so we'd love to get at it and get started. My name's Peter Ladner. I'm a fellow at the Center for Dialogue at Simon Fraser University, and this is part of a series of events that I've been putting on under the theme of planning cities as if food matters. And in January, some of you were lucky enough to enjoy some presentations from Will Allen, the legendary urban farmer from Milwaukee. And if you were at any of them, you would have heard him say over and over again, it's all about the soil. It's all about the soil. It's all about the soil. And he showed us pictures of parking lots where you just pile the soil up and away you go and you can start growing food. And of course, his own farm in Milwaukee where he's growing amazing amounts of wonderful food, and it's all about the soil. So we're going to talk about the soil tonight, because that got me thinking, well, how are we making soil here? And talking to some of the people growing in our city and in around our city, they're wondering, where can we get soil? We should be composting nearby. And meanwhile, the region is setting limits for what can go into the landfill. So there's an interesting confluence of issues coming together, the people needing soil, people needing to keep it out of the landfill. And now what are we going to do? So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And I would like to kick off by thanking the folks who make this possible. The Real Estate Foundation has been very supportive for this and a number of other public events and discussions around food in the city and revamping our food system. Van City has very generously come in on this event. Nature's Path has been with us since the beginning, and once again they've got hampers for all our presenters. And Nature's Path is a Vancouver-based organic cereal producer and retailer, and has done wonderful work supporting community gardens and organic growing right across North America. And Transform Compost, John Paul, one of our presenters, our last presenter tonight, very generously stepped up and offered some support as well. So I'd encourage you to look at his presentation at the entrance of the event. And we also have a sheet that the Nature's Path people have there. You can win a hamper like this. I think it's even bigger. If you just sign up and put your email on that, and then we're going to do a draw at the end, I guess. Is that how it works? Maria, she's out there nibbling on cereal. So to begin, I thought we would start with an overview. Sally Brown is here from Seattle. You can read the details of her biography in the program. I invited her because I thought it was important to just set the stage with somebody who has looked at this issue from many different angles. She is a former chef. She was in the restaurant business. She was in the grocery business. And then she went and decided she wanted to really focus on growing things in the city and bridging the rural and urban parts of agriculture. So she's now at the University of Washington. She came up here. She just got off the bus a few hours ago, and she's ready to go to tell us her view on all the different things that are possible and some of the things that are going on with composting in the city. Please welcome Sally Brown.
And if you want proof that I used to cook for a living, you can see I still know how a little bit. I've been thinking about this kind of stuff for a long time, and you're going to get a real broad brush here, so be patient. And I don't know if people want to ask questions during this, or that'll take too much time.
We'll have a question period after.
Okay, so let's just. I don't know if you guys had the same type of parenting when you were growing up, with the threatening to send the extra food to the starving children, and this was before FedEx existed, so you knew it was an empty threat. But now in Seattle, there's really something good you can do with your leftover food scraps, and there are in select municipalities. Right now in Seattle, food scraps go in the same bin as yard waste, and it's a really neat thing to be able to do. But I'm going to give you a very broad brush overview here. So, okay. When you're talking about food scraps, and you can think of this kind of notion when you're thinking of any organic residual, any carbon-based residual. It's going to have value. The same reasons that you want to eat food, or a lot of the same reasons, not all the same reasons. The microbes probably don't have that same Haagen-Dazs craving that some of us have. But food is going to have certain things of value depending on one's perspective. We eat Haagen-Dazs because you had a bad day or because it tastes really good, but you also eat it because it has energy. All food has energy. And so, question when you're thinking of what to do with the residuals with food, do you want to think about that energy? And that's going to be the carbon value. The fixed carbon is also beneficial for things like soil, because you may not know this, but the largest emitter of CO2 to the atmosphere over the course of our playing around on Earth has been the terrestrial sphere. Mining, agriculture, deforestation have emitted more CO2 to the atmosphere over time than any fossil fuel emissions. So this is a big hole that can be fixed, and fixed carbon fixed through photosynthesis is a way to do that. The other thing that this has, and this is potentially a bad example, though it does have calcium, food that we eat has nutrients. And these nutrients are precious, and we're going to start understanding more and more how precious they are. Phosphorus is one of the biggest plant nutrients that's required. There are big concerns that we're going to run out of phosphorus in the next 30 to 40 years. Nitrogen, we got an atmosphere full of it. It takes an awful lot of energy, about 4 kilograms of CO2 to fix a kilogram of nitrogen. The Haber-Bosch process is really energy intensive. So when you're looking at that leftover stuff that you didn't want to eat, that liver that's on your plate, realize it may not have value to you at this point, but it has a lot of intrinsic value, and how to decide what the best thing to do with these leftovers. Okay, so a lot of focus, particularly I see this in the States a lot. I see this particularly from companies that manage residuals in landfills, is energy value. And there's been a big emphasis on keeping materials in landfills because they make green energy in landfills. This is what's being said. There are two basic ways that you can get, there are three basic ways that you can get energy. This is oversimplified, and I'm going to be told soon that I'm all wrong on one of these. If I'm not all wrong, just a little bit wrong? Okay. There are sort of combustion and technologies, straight out burning. And here you have a coal-fired power plant in Washington State, and pyrolysis, which is also a proven technology, but a technology that's currently viewed as having a lot of promise as a way to manipulate and produce cooler end products than just heat. Cooler is not a scientific term, but the problem with food scraps is they're very wet. Average percent solids content is about 20 to 25%. And both of these conventional technologies, or I'm calling conventional, pyrolysis and combustion, require feedstocks to be relatively dry before you process them. Has anybody here ever been a Boy Scout or Girl Scout, or tried to start a fire in the woods here in November when the rain has started, or any time last week if your spring has been like my spring? Wet doesn't burn so well, and so you end up not necessarily getting the most efficient use or extraction of energy from these materials. This is food waste from the UW cafeteria, and you can see what I mean about these feedstocks being fairly wet. Now, I did an energy balance for municipal biosolids. I do a lot of work with biosolids. That's what you get when you flush the toilet after you've successfully eaten the material on your plate. Anyway, and there's a lot of talk about pyrolysis or combustion as a source of energy for biosolids. And if you just do a straight-out comparison of the energy contained in the biosolids, and again, energy in the biosolids is going to be less than energy in food waste because we already ate it once and got our share of energy out of it. But if you do a balance here, and do I have a point? Is this a pointer? Look at that. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. If I knew how to use it, it would be. Anyway, you can see that biosolids have about the same percent solids as food waste, and you get a break even, which means you don't lose energy by burning it when you're at about 30% solids, which means that any net energy that you get is going to be relatively small if you're dealing with a wet material. Now, there's an alternative way that's also fairly standard and well-known, understood, still to be optimized, anaerobic digestion. Anaerobic digestion, in my mind, is a really good way to get energy out of stuff that's very wet, because anaerobic digestion means digestion without oxygen. It means making methane. And this is what landfills do, and what landfill gas is, it's methane. And you can also do this in controlled digesters. So a controlled digester is not like where I grew up, Fresh Kills in Staten Island, 6,000 acres of landfill. A controlled digester is a big tank that holds, I don't know how many liters of water, but it's a whole lot less than 6,000 acres of a landfill. And here you can see this is these are values that I write a column for BioCycle. It's one of my favorite things that I do in my job. And my newest column, I have these graphs. I calculated how much energy in theory you get from landfill gas versus how much you get from controlled digestion. And these are the controlled digestion is from actual studies of digestion of these materials, and the landfill numbers are from protocols that give you greenhouse gas credits for taking material out of landfills. So how much gas do you collect and how much energy is that worth, okay? And so you can see that food scraps, really good source of energy, yard waste, not nearly as good, and you can see that you get more energy in a controlled digester. These are really optimistic values for a landfill. Because landfills, anaerobic digestion, the bugs like pH about 7, they like solids content around 5, you get a little too much protein, they get fussy, you get a little too much fat, oil, and grease, they get a little fussy. It's a process that works much better if it's managed really closely. Is everybody following this so far? Yeah, okay. Okay, now, the problem with putting materials in landfills for clean energy is that 6,000 acres, and with the regs in the states, at any rate, even if you have a sanitary landfill where you're required to start collecting gas, you're not required to do that until the waste has been in a landfill cell from 2 to 5 years, for 2 to 5 years. And if you have food that you forgot about in the garbage can over the weekend, if the temperature gets above 20 C, you know that when you come back to the house, anaerobic decomposition has already started because that food stinks. Right? You've all seen this. This is not an unusual phenomenon. Anaerobic decomposition can let out bad smells. Food waste decomposes really quickly. So there's a very high potential that this stuff that's been in the landfill for 2 to 5 years before gas collection starts is going to release quite a bit of methane. And so the CO2 equivalent of methane is 23 times or so over a 100-year time frame. You end up, the methane you release is a whole lot more detrimental than any energy you would get. So here is the emissions, and you can see that number goes up to 3 there on that big first blue bar, and that credit there was a lot less than 3, right? You guys can add this. 0.15, 3, which is, yeah. And so if you put the two together, if you take these materials to a landfill, you may get a small amount of energy, but you're going to emit a whole lot of CO2 equivalent. So landfills for green energy is really a myth. So that's the first main point. Energy, you can get it from combustion, you can get it from pyrolysis. You'll hear about how pyrolysis is better than I think it is later on. But for me, anaerobic digestion is a really great way if you want to get energy from wet stuff like food waste. And in fact, you already have in this very city anaerobic digestion facilities, freestanding large-scale anaerobic digestion facilities at your wastewater treatment plant. And you have some wastewater treatment plants around the world, a couple in the U.S., that are starting to accept alternate feedstocks. Big example is San Francisco. They had excess digestion capacity, so East Bay Mud told the Recology, the waste collector, you can have one. And they started taking commercial food waste from San Francisco, grinding it up, and putting it into the digester, which is a way to get energy, preserve a portion of the carbon, maintain your nutrients, not lose your nutrients, and they're making enough energy that they're selling a lot back to the city, and they still have feedstocks for composting. So we looked at this at UW, And one thing, this is material from City of Tacoma, their standard wastewater material, and then we started putting stuff in it. In this case, what is this? This is candy. And so you know why candy gives you a boost here, because you take that, I think this was almond roca scraps, or discards actually. I'm not showing you the fat, oil, and grease slide, but you know after you see the fat, oil, and grease anaerobic digestion production slide why you really want those French fries. Anyway, the clear triangles are just the regular energy from wastewater treatment, and you put the candy in and you get an enormous amount of energy in a very short amount of time, several days. Okay, this is a really good thing. You can do it with existing infrastructure. This in municipalities is generally at the wastewater treatment plant, or you can do what a composter in the Seattle area is doing, and it's also fairly common, or starting to be more common, is what's termed dry digestion. Dry digesters look more like garages with stuff piled inside them. So instead of your old tools, you have a pile of food and yard waste. And here you can tell it's called dry digestion because instead of a liquid, you're digesting more of a glop, solids content 10 to 25%. I haven't seen numbers, but Cedar Grove, which is the company that's handling the food and yard waste from City of Seattle, signed a contract to do dry digestion. So what they're going to do is get energy out of the material with this type of system and then go on to make compost. So for me, this is a fabulous idea because I love compost. Okay. If you do a greenhouse gas balance for composting, the fact that so much food waste in the States, it's 98% of the food waste currently goes to landfills. The fact that you're taking this material out of a landfill, and about 50% of the yard waste goes to a landfill as well. So just by taking it out of the landfill, stopping that methane from entering the atmosphere, you're getting a big greenhouse gas credit. There are protocols, Clean Development Mechanism, which is the UN crediting agency. Alberta has a protocol. The Climate Action Reserve in California, the Chicago Exchange of Blessed Memory had a protocol as well. You can see you get huge credits for diversion of materials. But you should also notice that you can get potential credits for electricity in the case of digestion. Soil carbon sequestration is something I've been working a lot on, and you'll see data here, and fertilizer offsets because of the energy required to produce fertilizers. So from a carbon perspective, and these are fairly conservative values, just by taking these materials out and using them, you're doing a good thing, and you should feel better about yourself at night, whether or not you did eat that Haagen-Dazs or not. It was another bad joke. Okay, now, this is one of my favorite pictures, and you can see my opinion on the subject right here, and I could just about sit down now, but he's lying on some compost. So what does compost do for soils? And I'm going to first talk about, I did a sampling for the Waste Management Board in California, a life cycle assessment, and one of the parts here was to look at whether compost really has any effect on soils. We sampled all types of places in California. Let me tell you that Palm Springs may sound really good to you right now, but we went in June and it was about 105 in the shade, and I thought I was going to die, but that's okay. And what we saw here is a lot of variability across sites, depending on length of time that compost has been used, rate of compost application, potentially how we did sampling, and this is mainly to show you a variability in carbon concentration in the soils. But if you look over all sites, and this is a paper that's coming out in 2 weeks in Compost Science and Utilization, you can see that this is change over control. You get big increases in soil carbon, you get big increases in soil microbial activity, you get increases in water holding capacity, and you get decreases in soil bulk density. You guys probably didn't go to ag school about soils, or a couple of you did, because I read the background material and I know at least one person here knows something about soil. But bulk density is how heavy the soil is, and if you dig into a really compacted soil, you can break a sweat very, very easily, and it's really hard for plants to grow in a compacted soil. So what you want to do in a soil is make it light and fluffy and improve the tilth of the soil. And bulk density is a standard measure of how light and fluffy or how good the tilth of a soil is. So here you can see all these things, you add compost, they all get better. And being that we depend on soil to grow our food, it's a really nice thing to have healthy soil. Okay, nitrogen. Total nitrogen, both in cases where we compared compost to conventionally managed and compost, the compost section to other organically managed controls. That's a little cumbersome, but increases in total soil nitrogen. So the point here is not only are you improving the soil, you're providing a nutrient source, which is replacing synthetic fertilizer, which is a really good thing. And not only are you storing more water, particularly in sandy soils, but in the high clay soils where the water tends to pond on the surface or run off and flood like crazy, what you're doing is making it easier for the water to infiltrate into the soil. So all in all, it's a wonderful thing. This was in California. If you go to Washington State, and I bet a number of you have been to Washington State, and I won't ask for a show of hands, though I'm tempted. Anyway, Kate Kurtz, who finished her master's last year and is from California and has made the move up north, did a series of soil samples across areas with long-term history of compost or biosolids use. And talking about potential uses for compost, it's not just urban ag. Biosolids, dryland wheat, compost to orchards, this is cherries, compost to landscaping plants, biosolids and compost to roadside use. The largest user of compost in Washington State, anybody have any ideas? Highways, state DOT is the biggest single user of compost in Washington State. And what it's done for their stormwater problems is pretty impressive. Another one, turf grass, both compost and biosolids to turf grass, and she measured a range of properties, but in each of these sites you saw increased soil carbon, increased soil nitrogen. In many cases you saw increased water holding capacity, and in the highway soil that bulk density went from just about pure concrete to something that a plant could grow in. So you see a wide range of uses, you see a wide range of benefits. Okay? Okay. A lot of times when you start reading papers on what we should do with residuals, one of my pet peeves with this is they're always done on a per ton of feedstock. So if you look at the per ton of food waste, you get the methane avoidance, and the other benefits are pretty much inconsequential because that methane is such a big deal, and that per ton of food waste composts down to not very much material. But if you start thinking about our soil and how precious a resource our soil is, and how to best manage that soil and how to improve the soil because we've degraded most of our soils, if you express these benefits on a per hectare of land basis, all of a sudden you see that this is one of the best options we have. And the problem is there isn't enough waste to go around. Compost for farmland, if you make compost from yard waste and food scraps, you can cover about a tenth of the arable land per year, a tenth of 1%, 0.1% of the arable land in the U.S. per year. So it's not a question of having too much, it's a question of not having enough. This will be posted or something somewhere. You don't have to. There are numbers here if you want to look at the numbers. You can look at the numbers later. You could look at them elsewhere. Okay. So now, how many people here have used compost of some sort? Okay. So this is not a big surprise. This picture. If you've used a well-made some composts are very carbon rich and they can create nitrogen deficiencies. So you got to be careful. If you have a well-made product, however. Here you have the control on the top. There you have the compost amended, which looks a little healthier there. This is not difficult. And then this is from 2 summers ago. This is from about 30 years ago. We've known this for a while. It's enough of a fact that you hardly see it in the peer-reviewed literature anymore because, yeah, everybody knows that. Why do we have to do research on this? Okay. I've just talked about the benefits, the beauties, the joys of compost and how it's good to take material out of the landfill. And here the big emphasis is on compost for urban ag, for local food systems. But if you start looking in a broader perspective, we're now transitioning into what do you do with compost in a city. And for me, there are a huge number of uses. for a compost in a city. And once the value of these materials starts being recognized in an urban area, you're going to be facing material shortages rather than surpluses of materials, in my opinion. Okay, so here's a list. Landscaping, which I'm not really going to talk about because everybody, this is pretty straightforward. You know, you put in, yeah, okay. Urban agriculture, but green infrastructure is a very big deal for me. So first you get to hear about a little bit about urban ag, and then green infrastructure. Okay, urban ag is very trendy. You know this. I don't have to talk about this. People are starting to figure out that potatoes really grow underneath the ground, and that it's really hard to grow lemons here, which is not something people knew. And you may laugh, but it's true that people didn't necessarily know that you couldn't grow pineapples. When I had the produce business in New York City, I was like, all local, all local. I can't tell you the number of orders I got for pineapples. So let me have a sip of tea here. This is a group here called Alley Cat Acres. They started an urban farm collective. They have taken over a couple of abandoned city lots, and they're growing not individual pea patches, but it's a farm. You know, it's planted as one thing, and a lot of it is donated to a food bank. Their plots are all amended with the biosolids compost that's produced in the city. They bike the material to food banks to reduce CO2 emissions, but this is, and half of them are from Santa Monica. So that tells you how trendy they are. Kate, anyway, so you have reasons for urban farming, and they're all wonderful reasons, and urban farming is a great thing. Local food systems is a big catchphrase now. Urban food deserts, if I spelled the desert right there, you can tell me if I didn't. But this is a big issue in a lot of communities. There's no place to get real food, so you're starting to see local urban ag as a solution to these food deserts. And what you're also seeing, and you can see this in the literature, is a wide range of benefits attributed to community gardens. Increased community structure, tie strength within communities, improved social interaction, safer communities. It's a way to build neighborhoods and tie people together. So the benefits of urban ag are varied, and it's a wonderful thing. When you're talking about urban soils, what you can find with urban soils in many cases is very high lead concentrations, because people used to drive cars, people used to use leaded paint. You can see very high compaction, low organic matter, very poor tilth. You can see low fertility concentrations, low carbon concentrations. For all of these things, compost is going to be a wonderful thing, because it's going to make that soil healthy again. It's going to dilute contaminants really quickly, because you're going to need a lot of compost, and you're going to have a real hard time tilling it in very effectively, because you're tilling it into those rocks. So you're basically going to grow in largely compost. The other thing is, most of the urban gardeners have no idea how to grow stuff. They know it's cool and they want to do it, but have they ever been or owned a family farm? No, they know where in the Safeway or the Giant or the supermarket they can get this. They don't know what kale is. They don't know what cardoon is. So if you add compost to soil, you're going to make it so that soil can grow plants relatively easily, so you don't have that first-time disaster, nothing grew for the community gardener. You have a success for the community gardener, and that makes them want to come back and grow again. It takes a lot of the unknowns out of agriculture. It's like cheating, but it's good. Okay. This is a little tiny plot. I have another picture. This is Kristen, who started a community garden system in the city of Tacoma. And you can grow a lot of food in a really small area. So it's a wonderful thing for urban health. I guess I just sort of said that. But one thing that Kristen did in her research was ask in community gardens where people found out about soil and what they used to make their soil healthy. She interviewed people in Boston, in Tacoma, and in Seattle. Seattle has Cedar Grove, which is a very, very active compost producer using food scraps and yard waste. They advertise. They have bag material available. They do a lot of outreach. They sponsor a garden show. Everybody in Seattle knew that she interviewed, knew what Cedar Grove was, knew what composting was, and were concerned about quality of compost to the point where they were telling their neighbors, oh no, you can't put the plastic bag in there. So you had an awareness of a process because through the gardening and through the use of the product. In Tacoma, they have a really active biosolids program where they've been making a material for home gardeners for 20 years now. And there, Tagro is a household name. And everybody knows about Tagro in their utility bills, and everybody comes and gets Tagro. In Tacoma, they didn't know where the yard waste went because it gets composted, but the company sells all wholesale. They had no idea. They all knew about wastewater treatment. They all knew about Tagro. In Seattle, they didn't know about wastewater treatment. They knew about Cedar Grove. So not only is it a wonderful thing, these composted materials for the urban gardener to make a successful garden, it's also a wonderful way to educate people that really haven't thought about these residuals. As long as they go away, it's okay. It's a way to educate them about a process and make them better participants in that process. Okay? Did I convince you all there? Maybe? Okay. Okay. But for me, the thing that I think is, okay, so I convinced you I love compost, right? I convinced you I like anaerobic digestion. Okay? Local food systems, you can tell I think they're great. For me, the biggest thing for organics is integrating use of these organic materials into urban infrastructure. And what you get, and I'm going to talk about this for a while now. One is green roof construction, and are you seeing some green roof construction here? And a lot of the green roof construction, the soil material has been specced out, and they're very concerned about having organic matter that'll decompose, so you have a lot of vermiculite use in a lot of cases. It's true, right? Okay, City of Tacoma, they decided they wanted to make a biosolids product that was suitable for green roofs. So this is a green roof from biosolids. You can do this with composts. You can do this really effectively with a range of composts. It's not going to be a huge use, but it's a nice use for your materials. What I think is really going to be a huge use is stormwater management. We're seeing in the States stricter regulations on stormwater discharges. We're seeing more concerns. Many of our waste treatment systems are combined sewer systems, so it's domestic wastewater and rainwater. And when you get too much, when you have a catastrophic rain event, not only do you release stormwater into the environment, you release untreated sewage into the environment, and this is not a good thing. I don't care what your perspective is. Nobody likes combined sewer overflows. And so you can try and deal with this from an engineered perspective, a traditional engineering perspective, or you can try and take advantage of ecosystem services. The other thing that's happening in municipalities is, because, and this is true in Seattle, you have so much concrete, so much asphalt, that even though it rains so much of the year, the whole systems have been designed to take the water away from the streets as quickly as possible and into the rivers away. Take it away as fast as you can. You're seeing in summer months watersheds with big-time water deficiencies in the Seattle area, so that you have stream flow so low that it's really detrimental to fish life because you've been so good at moving the water away so quickly. So if you start looking at ecological services as a way to manage your stormwater, this is a wonderful thing from a municipal perspective, and it's a wonderful thing if you make compost because it's a huge potential end market. Bioretention is the cool name or one of the common names for these systems. Bioswales, rain gardens, there's a whole list of names. The green states are states that have some type of regs or information online about how to use bioretention systems for stormwater management. And I had a class that worked on a project for a guy at Whidbey Island on this. They did a lit review looking at whether compost was a really important part of this. And in the literature you can see, and if I knew how to use this pointer right. No, that wasn't it. Okay, that was a different thing. Anyway, okay, you'll bear with me. The top line is the 100%, and you can see you got the median. The box plot is a really nifty thing if you know how to read it or use the program. But the point is, you can have some failures with compost with turbidity, nitrogen, phosphorus, copper, but these were generally 1 point in the study failures, and what you can see is in general, compost is really effective at dealing with stormwater. The other thing that compost does is it holds an enormous amount of water. So not only can you clean water with these compost-based systems, you can hold a lot of water, so instead of rushing over the asphalt into the stream and flooding out the stream, you can store water and potentially recharge the watersheds and recharge the groundwater. We did a little bit of a study with this class. We used straight off the shelf compost that was very nutrient rich, and I used this on purpose. I told them to use this on purpose because some composts are good for some things and not so good for other things. And we mixed it with woody material so that less nutrients would come out of the system. And sure enough, the top one on the red is the total N. You mix that high nutrient compost with wood chips, and all of a sudden there's no more nutrient leaching, or very little nutrient leaching. And what you do see is also when you mix it with the wood chips, it's really good at soaking up fecal coliform bacteria, so they don't enter the freshwater systems. So in Seattle, this is one place where they've started applying this, and where the city managers are concerned that there won't be enough compost to meet the demand because they're going to go much larger scale with this. C Streets is the designer program, and the C Streets blend is about 50% compost, 50% sand, and there are plantings involved, and it makes it look kind of pretty, wouldn't you say? And I'm going to have another sip of tea here. It looks really pretty if you live there, but if you read the numbers on that slide, you can see that if you're concerned with stormwater management from a municipal perspective, you make it look pretty, and you've saved yourself a fortune. And in fact, this is a really great guide here. This is the next column. You get to read about this if you ever look at the column. And this is available online. A group out of Chicago attempted to quantify benefits associated with green infrastructure. And for one bioswale that treats 4,000 square feet of surface plus the 2,000 square feet of bioswale, they're assuming 38 inches of rain. They're assuming 80% efficacy in capturing the water. They tried to put a dollar number. That one little bioswale that's not very big, okay, that's in a year 114,000. I'm sorry I didn't convert this. You'll be patient. You get the fact that it's a big number, and you'll excuse me for my weaknesses here. But that one little bioswale is 114,000 gallons of water saved from entering the sewer system each year. The cost of treating that water is about $10.50. The infrastructure costs of piping and building the treatment facility to treat that, for that little 6,000 square foot area is something around $10,000. So you can see compost can be a huge savings in this type of area. Now, maybe not so much in Phoenix, but in areas where it does rain, this can be a major issue. Plus, electricity used to treat the water, once it gets to the treatment plant, you get the benefits. The other thing that the study did was realize that the benefits go beyond the engineering perspective and attempted to quantify those benefits. What they saw, and this was a wide range, and it's not precise, but improved real estate values, both because the neighborhood looks a lot better and also because the risk of flooding goes down. So in areas in a floodplain, you get an even greater appreciation than shown here. The other thing they quantified was the fact that people are going to go out more if it looks nice, and the health benefits per individual they gave is 800 US. So as we start to understand these things better, the value of organics gets more and more pronounced. Okay, now, I hope I've convinced you all that you should never, ever send any of that food waste, however rancid it is, to the landfill, and you should compost it all, maybe with anaerobic digestion first, maybe not, depending on what's available. It's a wonderful goal, but there it's not necessarily that easy, and you have to take care and realize that there are problems as you try and move to this type of system. And I want to end this with a little bit of a discussion on what concerns and what problems are likely to arise. Okay. One is participation. You have to get people to participate, and you have to get them to realize things like the plastic bag is not a good thing to put in the food waste. Okay, you have to, that the little plastic labels that they scan in the supermarket, that's not a good thing in a compost product. The wire that attaches your bunches of broccoli rabe or rapini, anybody here use rapini besides me? Yeah, and you know those wires, right? Those are not good in your compost. You don't want those in your compost, right? People are very used to putting out garbage and having it go away. To start having to separate it and to realize that that yucky stuff you can really put in the food waste bin, it's okay, it takes time. And different communities will have different participation rates, different levels of contaminants. Hints here, there's an organization in Alameda, California called stopwaste.org, and they're the ones that did this ad. They have brilliant ads. They make you smile and chuckle whenever you see them, and you need a lot of public education, and you need it not just for a week but for years to get this to be standard behavior. Okay. You also have to think on a broader level. Those meat trays, for example, this was a personal pet peeve of mine, because one of the things you want to do is have it so all the stuff associated with food, in many cases, can be compostable as well. So, for example, now in Seattle, we have these brown meat trays which can go in the compost bin. You have Sun Chips that tried really hard. Do you guys know about Sun Chips? They made a compostable bag. They had a great ad campaign, but the videos on YouTube started appearing about how noisy the bag was, so they recalled it. Yeah, but supposedly they're coming out with a new one. Okay. In one reason I want to move north to this side of the border, when the Democrats had control of the House and the Senate and didn't do anything with it in the states, one thing they did do was make food waste compostable in the Senate House cafeteria. Republicans came in, got rid of that right away. Why did they do that? Because the spoons melted in the soup. This is a concern. You can get compostable utensils. There are some problems with heat resistance or ability to withstand heat. So, anyway, they could have used just metal spoons as far as I'm concerned. Compostable bags. Realize that not all compost piles will break down compostable materials equally, so it's really important to do the research. Even though something claims to be compostable, it may not be. The more readily available compostable materials you have, the less contaminants you'll have in your compost piles. And contaminants make a lousy product and make a product that nobody wants to use or that's not suitable for high-end uses. Okay, another thing that you hear about all the time is the collection issues. How can this be good for the environment when we need all those more trucks? And you hear this a lot from the solid waste industries that make a lot of money. I'm sorry, I'm not sounding I'm sounding overly politicized here. There's a big concern on how you structure collection systems when you separate a range of residuals. And in fact, you can have the black bin for garbage, this is what we have, the green bin for yard and food waste, and the blue bin for recyclables, and we can mix paper, glass, and plastic. So it's a lot more complicated a system than the one can and the one truck. What you can do, but this takes time and work, is realize that if there's nothing in that black can that's going to stink or go bad, and in fact, in my mother's senior apartment building, they started food waste composting, and she said, and I didn't pay her any money at all to say this, she said, I have no garbage anymore. So what you can do is start working on reducing the frequency of collection of the black bin, because you don't have putrescibles and you have much reduced volume, but this takes time, and in many cases or areas, legal infrastructure says that you can't do that. So it's a broader change that you have to work on. So it's not just saying food scraps are great to compost, let's do it. There's a range of factors. Finally, you have process issues. Cedar Grove, I've talked about, they're a great operation. They use Gore technology, which is real high-end technology, and somebody, you're going to hear about Gore, I think, yeah. And they try hard, but food waste can stink really, really quickly. So if you start working with food waste as part of a compost feedstock, you have to be very, very concerned about odor issues, because the best environmentalists, if it stinks when they're trying to have a barbecue on that sunny Saturday once a year, they no longer want compost because it smells bad. So realize that learning how to deal with odors, how to minimize odors, is going to be a key to a successful operation, and it's not so easy. Gore has spent a lot of money and a lot of time. This headline is from February of this year. So, and I mean, this is not a sloppy operation. Finally, issue of pathogens. Food waste is going to have pathogens in it, and you want to make sure you have a pathogen-free product if you're promoting it for local agriculture. There are well-established ways to make compost to kill pathogen. Time and temperature, 55 C for in a windrow, 5 turns, 3 days at each turn. It's well done. You can document it, you can do this. Can a smaller scale facility do this and maintain the temperatures, maintain the records? This is a concern when you're talking about mid-scale composting in a city. If you leave material for a long enough period of time, you will get pathogen destruction, but if the trucks are coming every day in a mid-sized facility, can you get the pathogen kill and accommodate increasing loads of material? So these are just things, these are realities to think about. I painted a really pretty universe, but in order to make that universe real, you have to realize that I'm not making this stuff up. So finally, I think you know what this says before you read it. So, and that's it. No questions now, or questions? Yes.
Thanks for your presentation. It's interesting, and you had a lot of technical information there, so it's kind of hard for dummies like.
But I put in pretty pictures so you wouldn't be overwhelmed.
Of course, but as with many public policy areas, you're talking about things from the point of view it's sensible. Let's do it, and of course, a lot of people would like to do that. But there's a big part of the picture which is important, and that is the economic aspects, the public policy issues that are related to it. So I was just wondering if you could talk, of course, briefly and in general terms, because that's a huge subject, about the idea of subsidies and taxes and other kinds of incentives to encourage people to do the right thing, because that's obviously an important part besides the measures you.
Yeah. So from the first part is landfill diversion, and you're going to have much bigger willingness to divert materials from a landfill if you're diverting them to something that's a similar cost to landfilling or a lower cost to landfilling. So what was done in Europe was landfill tax was imposed, something like $200 or 200 euros a ton, a wet ton, and that was a fabulous incentive at getting material to composting facilities, because no composting facility, even in Manhattan, I would venture to say, is going to charge you a $200 a ton tip fee. In Texas, on the other hand, it costs $12 a ton to put stuff in a landfill. So it's very hard to incentivize composting there unless you have such a demand for the product that the price of the resale is high enough. For energy, for anaerobic digestion, City of Tacoma was the one that financed the study with the almond roca. Electricity in Tacoma is dirt cheap. They have not gone full scale with this because it costs more to produce that kind of energy than they sell it for. In other areas in California, it's a different deal. And so what's been done in other countries is feed-in tariffs or for other sources of energy. So let's pay, if normal electricity is 10 cents a kilowatt hour, let's make if we get it from wind sources, solar sources, or methane from bioenergy, let's pay 14 cents a kilowatt hour and make it so that there's enough of a profit motive there that it's feasible to do this. infrastructure, existing infrastructure. It's interesting now because City of Philadelphia, City of Chicago are all starting to develop big green infrastructure projects because they've looked at climate models for the next 100 years and realized, like, we're screwed unless we do something big really fast. What they haven't connected yet, and this is very common, is they haven't connected, we're going to do all this green infrastructure, it needs compost. Where do we get the compost? They source out the compost at the same time that they're landfilling their organics and not using their biosolids. So it's a process. You got to make the connections. And one thing that I've seen working a lot with the King County, which is City of Seattle, infrastructure is so the compost that we tested for the stormwater test, there was the biosolids-based compost. The guy in charge of the combined sewer construction and the green infrastructure had never talked to the lady in charge of the biosolids program. He's dealing with his answers on the same floor and they haven't talked to each other. So divisions within municipalities are a huge hurdle, and getting communication between these is a huge hurdle. If you looked at that dollar figures for that little tiny bioswale, you can see it's very cost effective. It's just getting the divisions and also getting a system that's generally been using an engineering mindset to look at an ecological. I'm sorry that was so long. Any other questions? Or yeah. Anaerobic digestion, what is that on a house-by-house basis? Well, okay, so this is actually an interesting question. My spouse is currently on his dream job installing toilets in Afghanistan, so you can see what kind of discussion we had at home before he went away. But a big thing in nations where you don't have any wastewater treatment infrastructure is something that they're trying to produce that work well are anaerobic, home-use anaerobic digesters or biogas toilets where you can put your food waste in as well. So this is starting to be developed in developing nations. In a country with a large-scale infrastructure like you have here, you're going to want a centralized collection system, so it's not going to necessarily work on a home-by-home basis. Anybody else? Did I bore everybody that much? Yes, back in the...
You talked a lot about energy at the beginning of your presentation and the extraction of energy from organic waste, and most of that seems to be in relation to the gases that are let off through the decomposition of those wastes or the burning of them. And then you went on to talk about soils and their use in growing food, and the connection between energy and growing food and producing things with soil wasn't very clear to me, and there wasn't a lot of talk about aerobic decomposition as well, which I understand is actually a really great way to make compost, the best way to make compost.
Okay.
And that energy that we get from our soils is, I think, a really important piece of energy that we didn't have any graphs that showed us the energy values of good, healthy soil, and trying to, you showed us a lot of ways of making numbers.
I think I got where you're coming from. Is it okay if I? Sure. When you talk about residuals, a lot of the focus in the discussion is energy. How can we get energy? It's considered a source of green energy. So what I was trying to do was show you different ways, or show not you, but to talk about different ways energy could be gotten from these materials. If you burn or pyrolyze these materials, it's a one-shot deal. You get the energy out, whatever energy you get, and then the material is gone. If you use anaerobic digestion, you can get energy out, but you'll have a residual organic fraction left. A portion of the carbon will not turn into methane, and you'll have a solids material left so that you can get energy and still have material that can be made into compost. One of the issues in how we view the world is that we have traditionally not placed a value on ecosystem services. And one of the papers that came out in '97. It was Costanza et al. In Nature, and it was a big group, and they tried to put a value on ecosystem services. And they listed 17 services. And annual value of these services was more than double. I don't remember, I have it on a different PowerPoint in my computer, but more than double the gross national product worldwide. And if you looked at those services, ecosystem services, 13 of those 17 or something like that were directly tied to the health of the soil. So one of the things you get when you apply compost to soil is you get bounty the first year, and bounty the second year, and bounty the third year. It's not a one-shot, you've blown it, it's a gift that keeps giving. So you're absolutely right. I did not make the direct connection. It's just so often I hear this discussion is so focused on energy, and energy is a useful term. And I'm not talking about every case here, but in a lot of cases, combustion, energy from combustion of these materials is another word for disposal, or it's a way to justify landfilling. So when I was pushing anaerobic digestion here, it's a way to extract energy, which is such a focus of the discussion, but at the same time get value for soils, which I'm a soil scientist, so for me that's very important. Did that help?
Yeah, I would just like further to say that, would you agree that there's other kinds of energy that aren't methane gas or different kinds of nitrogen oxides or whatever? And isn't it important for part of our conversation to be looking at the other kinds of energy that we can create from these materials and this resource that we have? And if we're constantly thinking about the energy that we can produce just to feed back into our existing industrial complex that fits with the structure of our society as we have it currently, are we kind of missing a bigger opportunity to fundamentally change the way we conceptualize the energy that exists in really good aerobic
I get. Okay, so.
I just want to interrupt for 1 second. If people want to make big questions, could you come to the microphones? Because we miss you on the live streaming if you don't. So for the next, we've got time for a few more. And if you could just step up to the microphones, that'd be great.
You have to, what you're saying in an ideal sense is a lovely thing. In a practical, real-world sense, you have a ways to go before what you're saying can be turned into a mindset. And in that process, you have to realize that people have energy demands and like to turn the lights on and go places. So we have a lot of paradigm shifts before we can fully embrace what you're talking about. And understanding how organics fit into an argument on energy when energy is such a focus on a public policy level is an important part of any discussion, and you have to become fluent in that in order to have your points heard. And I have to stop you here because you had 2 questions and I have to ask if anybody else has a question. I'm sorry. So it's, yeah. Jog up to the mic.
Well, I was just wondering, you're talking about using compost in the city and its value in, what was that the way you said it again? Diluting contaminants. And I've heard about this being talked about before, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit further about that value, or if you have any more information about that.
Sure, composting contaminants.
Yeah.
So, for example, your big contaminants in an urban area are going to be metals, largely lead. Lead in urban soils is often 200 to 800 parts per million. Your compost, the compost that we use in Seattle, the biosolids compost, the lead is 20 or 30 ppm. The food waste, yard waste compost, about the same, 20 to 30 ppm. So when you're taking the lead contaminated soil and incorporating that much compost into it, you're effectively diluting the lead contamination. This is not a permanent solution, or one could argue about that it isn't a permanent solution. You haven't taken that lead out, but you've effectively buried the lead or diluted the lead, so it's not a hazard. And certain composts, in fact, have been shown to change the speciation of the lead, and a well-tended soil will also, with enough phosphorus, change the speciation of the lead, so the lead is less likely to do harm. You can also find in the literature a lot of papers that show that adding compost to soil is a way to stimulate microbial activity, which encourages degradation of organic contaminants like polyaromatic hydrocarbons and other materials of those sorts. So carbon-based contaminants in some cases can be broken down microbially, and that decomposition will be enhanced when compost is added to a soil. For the inorganic contaminants, you're not going to make the lead go away, or make the arsenic go away, but you can significantly dilute it. And the main way that lead in soil is a danger is by a kid eating dirt, direct ingestion. So if you have grass really thick and compost on top, that kid is going to have a lot of digging to do before they're going to get to a contaminated soil horizon. So practically you're doing a good thing in terms of contaminant exposure and risk when you're adding compost. Yeah.
I have two questions.
Sure.
Whichever one you're able to. The first one is, if you're familiar with the city of San Francisco's laws around compost and fines for restaurants, and if you are, if you would tell us a bit how that's working and their success rates. And then the second one, because my understanding is anyone and everyone selling any kind of food gets taxed a lot of money if any compostable goods are found in trash.
You see, I can tell you that I don't know, but I can tell you you call Chris Choate from NorCal and he can answer your question.
Cool.
NorCal is the company there, and they would be the one that would answer that.
And then my second question is, if you have seen anywhere anaerobic digesters that are set up as almost neighborhood food system collection sites, where like community centers maybe, or schools, or if somebody has a spot where the whole neighborhood can come and dump, and then someone's helping ensure that it's getting digested
The
properly.
only place that I've seen that is the Gates Foundation has now decided to give grants for sanitation, and I was reading some background documents that students at UW had prepared, and there are a couple of startup not to make a fortune but to save the world companies, and they are promoting and building such types of facilities in developing countries to not necessarily fabulous success rates, because anaerobic digestion is a somewhat finicky process and digesters have to be managed. So there's a potential to do that. I've read about it being done in Africa in a little bit, like in Kenya. I don't remember what countries, but on like a community level, no, I have not seen anything. It certainly would be feasible. I think I'm kind of brain dead right now.
Thank you very much, Sally. That was a fantastic overview, and I certainly learned a whole lot about compost, and it does show that there's more than just the food growing part, for sure. We're going to take a short break, and then we're going to come back, and we've got an all-star cast here of people who are actually making this happen in our region. And the people who are on the program are people who have been in the business or are doing things and can talk a little bit more about the details of the causes, the problems and concerns and opportunities right here, literally in our own backyard. So we'll give them a moment to set up, and then we're going to go really quickly through all of their presentations and have time for a couple more questions before we break. Thank you.